Evening and welcome to the June 16th meeting of the Millis School Committee. Thank you again for everybody for joining us via YouTube in this virtual meeting on our night before our last day of school. I will start by taking roll call attendance. Myself, Mark Conroy is here. Robin Briggs.
Here.
Steve Catalano.
Here.
Denise Gibbons.
Here.
Carrie Roach.
Here.
I believe our teacher rep tonight is Riley Dunn.
Here.
I believe our teacher rep and student is Riley Ben Padelka.
Here.
And Superintendent Nancy Gustafson.
Here.
All right. We don't have open session. And before we get into the action items, I'll actually we'll start with our student and teacher representatives. So Ben, you want to start?
All right, so today was the last, tomorrow is the last day of scheduled school for students. They have all been given their lesson plans for summer work, summer reading, and going into next year. An email has been sent out, which kind of goes over the grading system for term 3/4. And as of right now, graduation is scheduled still for sometime this summer for the seniors.
All right, great. Thanks, Ben.
Thank you.
Teacher rep, Riley.
Sorry, it's like it's my first Zoom call. At Clyde Brown, end of year activities have included a kindergarten parade last Thursday and a 5th grade graduation parade yesterday. Both were well attended and were filled with smiling children's faces, cheering teachers, and fun decorated vehicles. We will have one more end of school parade tomorrow, Wednesday, June 17th, beginning at 10 a.m. at the Clyde Brown driveway. A parent survey was sent out on Monday. We encourage parents to complete the survey. 37 responses so far, and look forward to the feedback. Check the Family Bears Den for the link. All are excited about the transition to our next principal, Mrs. Tana Django. Mrs. Django will officially begin her work in July, but has already been on board, attending virtual meetings with teachers and administrators. She will be a real asset to the Millis Public Schools. As a final note, Mr. Russo would like to thank the Millis community for their support throughout this year. Particular thanks to families who partnered so well with us during the school closure. Also to all the CFP staff and faculty whose flexibility and professionalism shined during this unique time in history. It's been an honor and a pleasure to work with such a fine group of educators and administrators. At the middle school, a parent survey was sent out on Monday. We encourage parents to complete the survey and look forward to the feedback. 6th and 7th grade are having end of year huddles on Google Meet this week. 8th grade held a virtual promotion presentation at 1 p.m. today on Google Meet. The link is available to anyone who would like to watch it at their convenience. The staff also greeted 8th graders who drove through the campus with their families to say farewell and pick up a gift bag with certificates and a promotion t-shirt. And the middle school sends best wishes for a wonderful retirement to the 8th grade math teacher, Mary Ellen Despinosa, who has worked at the school for the past 20 years. Mary Ellen is a dedicated educator who will always put her students first. She will be missed. And the middle school would like to thank the community and parents for their support during the school year and especially over the last 3 months. Summer reading for each grade level is posted on a Google Classroom set up for incoming students. Students have received invitations to join. And thank you to everyone at the high school. Thank you to everybody who came out to help celebrate our seniors during their drive around parade on June 4th. The parade was a great success and a lot of fun. And congratulations to all of the seniors who received awards at the scholarship and awards ceremony last night. And the high school would also like to thank the community and parents for their support during the school year, especially over the past 3 months. And the last day of school is tomorrow. I think we're all happy to say goodbye to this school year and looking forward to a great year next year.
Great. Thanks, Riley. I guess before we get into the action items, I also want to thank Joe Russo for the work he's done this year. who knew when he signed up for this that he was going to be opening a new building and then managing a pandemic as his 1-year stint with us. But thank you very much. By all accounts, the work you've done in helping facilitate this, both you and Elise, helping getting the Clyde Brown staff and helping us through the various stages of all this is greatly appreciated. And I know you're going to help out with a little bit of the transition as we move into the new principal. So I want to thank you for doing that as well.
Thank you. I appreciate that. It really has been a pleasure. It's been unique, certainly, unexpected, but it's a continuous learning profession, right? I didn't know I'd be learning so much at this point in my career, but it was fabulous. It was really interesting, and I was impressed with just how easily things work. When I came here, I came with the idea of let's see what it's like in a small district and how things work. And what I've learned is that there's a lot that can happen in a small district in a much easier way and a much more professional way than a larger district when there are fewer components to sort of work with. And the folks you have here, the folks that was already set up before I arrived, the teachers who were hired at the Clyde Brown really just stepped up in a big way. They adapted, they learned, and I think they'll continue to sort of make adjustments as we go forward. So that's a large part to what came before me. And also what Elise has been able to do as the assistant principal and help to she's the glue that sort of holds it together, and the component of not just Elise, but having a vice principal in a school of 600 students is really essential. I couldn't have done what I did, but I will say that, it's a well-oiled machine. Jane Leota is the school secretary, is an incredible support to the staff and to myself, as well as the administrative team, frankly, that really works well together. A lot of ideas back and forth and a lot of good thinking and process thinking, so that it's not just you have to do this. It was really a collaborative effort. And so I thank all of them, and I know I'm going on too long, but it's my last chance at a bully pulpit, right? So thank you very much for this opportunity.
Great. Thanks, Joe. All right, moving on then, our action items. First is consideration to approve the June 2nd meeting minutes.
Mr. Chair,
Ms. Briggs, there we go. I was trying to see.
I move that we approve the June 2nd school committee meeting minutes.
Second.
Been moved and seconded. Further discussion? All those in favor?
Aye.
Aye.
Motion carries. All right, next is consideration of the fiscal 20 transportation fees. This is regarding the fees that were collected this year for this year's service. Let me go. We have memo. Just trying to find the memo that we have. Here we go. Mr. Wigan, do you want to walk us through the memo you provided for tonight?
Yeah, one of the things that I think the committee was talking about, and rightly so at the last meeting, was looking at the total cost of transportation and how much of it came from the revolving fund, or if you will, fees, and how much of it came from the operating fund. And so what I did is I went back 4 years and gave you 4 years of history to take a look at. And for the most part, I think what you've seen is And I was trying to look here to see if I put my average in the memo. I thought I did somewhere. But I know that there was a high year of about 71%. And the revolving fund paying, oops, wait a minute. You know what? I'm going to go back to my spreadsheet because that's going to be easier for me to work from. Okay, so yeah, I know back in 2017, it was split almost, I won't say equally, but you had 59% of transportation paid for by revolving fund and 40% paid for by the revolving fund. But that's a little misleading because part of what went into the revolving fund was not just fees. Part of that was revenue that was received from other districts that were paying for us to transport their special education children. So that's also one of the reasons you saw revenue be so high in that particular fiscal year. The revenue in that particular year, I think, was somewhere around $306,000. And it certainly hasn't been that high ever since then, because we haven't had that kind of revenue from other districts coming to us. For the most part, I think what we've seen on average is that in regular transportation, about 63, almost 64% of salaries are paid for by the regular budget, the operating budget, and about 36% are paid for by the revolving fund, and almost the same split, slightly different, about 65% of expenses and 35% of expenses. Again, the split with most of the 65% being from the budget, 35% from the revolving fund. When we get into special education transportation portion, again, the averages skew much more towards the regular budget. You have about 75% paid for by the regular budget for salaries, under 25% from the revolving fund, and expenses, it's over 83% from the regular budget and just over 16% from the revolving fund. So that's kind of how things break down. I think what the takeaway is that any way you cut it over the years, the budget has paid 2/3 at least of the expenses for transportation. Bus fees don't cover all the cost of transportation. They never have, they never will, certainly at the current levels we have them at, and I don't think they do in any district,
Mr. Chair,
typically speaking. Yes.
Mr.
I'm
Chair.
sorry.
Terry, I'm going to stipulate that I'm going to probably ask several questions that you probably don't have answers for, and nor do I expect a quick turnaround. But as we move forward, no one would think that buses and vans are so complicated, but it is. So one of the questions that I would have, just in response to what you said about the SPED transportation, you said, I think about 76% is paid for out of the budget.
Correct.
And about 24 is coming out of the revolving. Is the money that's designated for SPED out of the revolving coming from the other districts that are paying?
The bulk of it is, yes.
Okay. So that was my immediate question. So the other, and this is not the first time, nor will this be the last time we have this conversation. So when we look at transportation, we're required to provide transportation for everyone in a SPED van. We're required to provide transportation for everyone that live, what is it, 2 miles? Is 2 miles that what we're using? So
Yeah,
beyond
2 miles or more. Yep.
So beyond 2 miles, so we're required to pay for them up to a certain
grade limit.
And I don't know, is that 6th grade, I think?
I believe it's 6th grade.
Yeah.
So when we move forward, regardless of what we decide tonight on other issues, we should really try to, in addition to the budget, look at the ridership and put them with either some coding or designee. So when we're looking at the breakdowns, because the breakdowns are helpful, but it doesn't necessarily tell the true story, right? We may be, the operating budget may be paying 76% of the overall budget for transportation, and it's required, meaning those are people that are either in a sped van or they live within outside of the 2 miles up to a certain age. And I don't know if that's exactly the case, but the numbers, the budget breakdown tells one piece of it, but we really need to know the ridership. And like I said, I'm putting this on in the 11th hour for you. So as we move forward and maybe as we progress into the next year, depending on what transportation is, we code our riders from the very beginning and we designate what bucket they belong in. Sorry for the long story here.
No. And I would just say it would be fairly easy for us to get you the over 2 and under 2 because we have to report that on the end of year report. Likewise, we have to report some statistics for special ed transportation riders. If we were to try and break it down by grade, you're right. We're going to need to do a little bit more on our end to try and code that because that's not something that's specifically required now. I don't think it's impossible for us to do, but it is something we'll have to, be thoughtful about in doing.
All right. So Terry, was there more that you were going to walk through on just as it relates to the potential for, or how the question we've asked regarding any potential refund for bus fees collected for fiscal 20 due to the fact that there was roughly 30% of the year that students weren't taking the bus because we were closed?
Well, I think there's a couple of different ways to look at it. I think one way to look at it is to straight say, okay, there were 63 days. We didn't provide bus transportation. And so that, as I believe I estimated in my memo, was around just over $74,000. And you could do that as a straight refund, or you could do that as an option with parents and say, do you want a refund or do you want a credit towards next year's bus fees? Of course, either way, you're going to have an impact on revenue someplace. In other words, if you give a credit towards next year, it's going to impact next year's total revenue that you would expect to receive. Now, again, one of the reasons I pointed out the percentages is that if you look at and saying that, let's be liberal and say that 30% of transportation is paid for by bus fees and 70% is paid for by the operating budget, then, to be perfectly honest, the fact of the matter is that one could argue, and I'm not saying that this is necessarily an argument the committee wants to make. Okay, I will put it out there. Okay, and this is just me speaking as one person. Okay, that the bus fees more than covered the first 7 months or 6 months of the year. Okay, until we went into closure. And in fact, we started dipping into the budget, before the closure, if you want to look at it that way. That is another way of looking at it. Still another way of looking at it is to say, as I've said before publicly, we'll say again for the audience, is that like other districts that have contractors who were advised by the Department of Elementary and Secondary Education to pay their contractors to make sure that they had a fleet next fall, we are no different in that we needed to make sure we had bus drivers that we would have next fall because bus drivers are in short supply. We needed to make sure we maintained buses to make sure we had buses for next fall. And we needed to do all those same things. It's just we didn't do them through a contractor. We did them ourselves. And I would argue we probably saved money in the process. So I think the difficult issue here is where do you go next? And I didn't make a recommendation because there's a wide swath that you could choose, from full refund to refund with a credit option for parents to something less than a refund for those 63 days.
Mr. Chair.
Mrs. Roach.
So I think last time we talked about where we didn't provide bus services for about 30% of the time. Does that seem accurate, Terry?
That's about right, I would say.
Okay, so we didn't provide bus services for about 30% of the time, knowing that, to Terry's point, the district has incurred some costs to keep up the fleet and to keep our drivers employed. Do we take that 30% and refund half of that 30%, where we keep some of it to help offset some of those operating costs, but yet still provide a bit of a refund to the parents for services that weren't offered or issued? Whether we give them the money or offer them a credit for next year, but what does the committee think? Does that seem fair?
Personally, I think that's a fair approach. I would lean towards giving an option of either a credit or a refund, and
Yeah.
the family can decide based on what they want to do. I think in fairness, I think we owe some type of a refund for services that weren't ultimately provided. But I think Terry brings up two things that are very valid, which is, depending on how you looked at it, and again, I don't support this concept, and I don't think anybody in the committee does, but one could argue, if we chose to designate that user fees paid were used up first and then the budget, an argument could be made that we spent that all first. But if we look at it proportionally, I think we do need to then look at the fact that there are some fixed costs that we can't ignore and we can't abide by. And if we were using a contracted service, we really wouldn't be in a position to have this discussion at all. So I think a 50% split on the 30% is fair. Other people do.
Mr. Chair,
Yep.
I'm trying to remember, because I know we talked a little bit at our last meeting about what the potential impact of that would be, and I'm scrolling up in Terry's memo. I'm just wondering if we have a sense of what that dollar figure looks like. I'm in support of doing the 50% of the unserviced time. I'm just curious as to what that looks like in revenue for the district, like in financial impact to the district.
I would say that it's approximately, if my math is correct here on the fly, it's approximately $38,000.
Okay.
That's 74,344 basically divided in two.
Okay. So again, I'm in favor of it. I do feel compelled to say that we are in a challenging budget situation. So I am torn with. I know we didn't provide the service. I totally understand there's a cost of doing business for us, and to be able to keep the buses and, more importantly, the drivers on staff. I am very concerned with how we're going to end up financially once the state publishes budget numbers and the adjustments we've had to make and the administration's recommendations. So I suppose I am reluctantly in favor of it, because I just worry about other financial impacts for next fiscal year that we don't have insight into, and where this could come back and potentially, does it become an FTE or half an FTE that we have to do something with further down the road? Because money is already tight, and I would imagine is only going to get tighter.
Anybody else have any questions, comments?
Mr. Chair, so
Yep.
at last meeting, I'm not opposed to a refund. The only question that I posed is, what are we basing our percentage of the proration? That, I'm still, we picked a number, and what's the rationale for that number? Once again, I'm not opposed to,
So I guess.
I'm
for
not
me-
suggesting we have to do 100%, but what's our thought process? We're usually very methodical and analytical. What's our thought process? Just saying 50% of it.
I guess it's really for me personally, I honestly think that there's a very good strong argument for 0. And I also think that there's a strong argument for 100% refund because, some of the decisions, that we made, that I think we made absolutely the right decision in terms of maintaining staff and doing things and finding alternative work. And we paid for drivers through this year, even though we weren't providing transportation services. We made those choices, and so there's to say that we're just going to retain the funds we collected because we chose to make decisions, with other people's money. I'm not completely comfortable saying we should give them 0. So I guess for me, it's looking at really the 2 basis points are 0 and 100%. And I'm just saying, let's split the difference.
Mr. Chair.
I think the 30% we know is we did 30% of the year wasn't.
No, I know that's not the number I'm talking about. I'm talking about, we know what the delta is. What is the split
So
on?
for me, that's where I'm comfortable with the 50% is because I think the only 2 data points we have is 100 and 0%. We don't really have much.
So for athletics, did any of the coaches get paid, or were coaches not paid? Does anyone know?
Yeah.
Coaches were paid?
Nancy's muted.
Nancy,
you're
you're
muted.
muted.
Sorry. Okay. Coaches were paid a portion, and that was part of the memorandum of agreement we bargained with the Teachers Association because coaching stipends are part of the teacher's contract.
So we gave 100% of sports fees back, yet we did incur a cost. Once again, our decision, I was right there supporting keeping on as many of the staff for as long as possible. So I'm right there with you. But if I'm trying to just look at, is there consistency and are we using the same process? Maybe we didn't spend as much money, but we gave 100% of the sports fees back and there was a cost.
Yep. If I may, Mr. Chair.
I'm not trying to talk us out of it. I'm just, when someone says, how did you make that decision? I know.
So I guess my question then is, well, then what's your alternative?
Well, I actually have another point.
There's a motion on the table. What's the alternative?
Mr. Chair, but
No,
I don't know if we have a
there's no
motion.
motion.
I don't know if we have a motion
I
yet.
don't have one yet.
Okay. All right, there's a
But I-
proposal. So what's the alternative proposal?
I have one quick thing though to Steve's point, if I could.
Yep.
For the spring season of athletics, 0 services, a full refund was given because 0 services were rendered. There was 0 that happened for spring athletics. So therefore they got a full refund. For the bus, there's 30% of services that we didn't provide. It's not that we didn't provide service the whole entire year. So I get Steve's point that we're incurring some cost, but there were no services that were provided. So it's 100% of, we give people 100% of their money back because there was 100% that we didn't provide them. If that makes any sense.
It does, but I think Steve's point is then we didn't provide 100% of the 30%. You know what I mean? Like, I guess his point is, how do we get from not giving 100% refund on this? And I've,
Which I'm
Yeah.
not, first of all, I'm not saying 100% of the total fees, right? The 30%.
right, you're saying 100% of the 30% we didn't
30%.
provide.
Yeah, all right, I get it.
And I
Listen,
didn't,
I think we have a cost of doing business for keeping buses so that we have a service to offer for next year.
and what's that cost?
So
Because if the cost is we need to maintain our staff and do limited maintenance, then the reality is we shouldn't be giving any money back, right? If there's a cost of doing business, but there's a service that we didn't provide. So we could make the argument of there's a cost of doing business for everything and never provide a refund.
No, I agree. And I think that's why, without knowing the exact dollar of what that service, of what those operating costs are, and I think it's impossible to get, that again, we go back to the two choices are 0 or 100, and 50% seems to be the compromise. Unless you want to do 0.
No, I said it. I've said it 5 times. I didn't. I'm not. I'm just.
I know.
I'm just trying
I
to.
just don't think there's a concrete answer to this is how we got to this. It's really our two choices is 0 and 100 of that 30%. And, there's a strong argument to both. So the compromise is let's go 50% because we're still offering a refund to the parents for services that weren't rendered, but we're still holding on to some of that money to help offset some of those operational costs.
All right.
So, Mr. Chair,
Mrs. Roach.
I guess I'm going to attempt this. I make a motion to initiate refunds for transportation fees incurred in FY20 for 50% of the 30% of unused cost. Does that sound right?
That's it.
50% of the 50%. So in essence, 15% of the bus fees for
you.
for FY20.
Could have done that math.
Second.
We have to stipulate that we want to give the option of a
That would be-
refund or a credit.
Yeah, we should put
Okay.
that should be included.
We can do that.
Been moved,
I seconded.
seconded. Any further discussion? All those in favor?
Aye.
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 Motion carries. All right. Next item is staying on transportation is discussion about fiscal 21 fees. So our discussion last week centered around pricing, but then the inevitable question afterwards was, without knowing exactly what next school year is going to look like in terms of transportation services provided, how do we struggle to try and price this out? From my perspective, under the auspice that it is highly unlikely that students will be back 5 days a week, or 100% of the students will be back 5 days a week. I don't know how we can, the question becomes, how do we charge the same rate and the same dollar value if we know at the outset kids are going to not be taking the bus as many days as they were supposed to this year? But then what does that impact? And then also our question overall was, what does a transportation model look like and what impacts are we looking at if we need more due to distancing on buses that could be required? So Terry, is there information on any of that that you can share more than what we had last week?
There's not a whole lot I can share without seeing the guidance from the commissioner. I can say we've worked up different models. And I think the most common model we think of right now is that we would probably have, if we're requiring parents to provide masks for their children, that we'd have one student per seat in the bus. And we think we can manage that with the current fleet, albeit it would be incorporating every single spare bus to make that work. Now, I would also say that I understand completely what you just said, Mark, about the whole concept of if we're only transporting, and again, depends on the model, if we're only transporting kids for half of the days, it doesn't seem fair to charge full fees. But I will also say that the buses will be running every single week. And so that becomes a problem. And I would say that it means that you're going to have probably a, conservatively speaking, if you were to charge half fees, you would have, again, conservatively speaking, about a $65,000 shortfall in revenue on top of conceivably the credits that we would be offering people for the refund you just approved. So that's going to put pressure somewhere else to obviously make up that ground to pay for transportation.
Mr. Chair?
Yep.
Terry, just a question on exclusive of the refunds.
Yep.
Running the buses as you just described, and let's call it the 65, around 65K shortfall revenue wise. Is that something that we could say is a direct COVID impact and put it in the CARES? I think they're calling it CARES or whatever
I've actually, yeah.
Okay, good. Sorry.
No, you're right. And I've actually talked to, there's actually 3 different things. And I've actually talked with the town on this, and we're trying to work out those details. There is the CARES Act, which probably won't cover it because they're looking for direct labor or stuff, PPE, that kind of things. There is NEMA, which definitely won't cover it, which again is probably going to primarily cover PPE. And then there is what the state is doing with free cash. And this is a little convoluted, and I don't think either the town or I are completely clear on what's happening with this yet. And I'm not blaming the town on this. It's very confusing. And I was in a meeting last Friday on this. And that is how we are going to be able to set aside certain expenses and they will not hit free cash. Now, that's all well and good, except that if they don't hit free cash, what are they going to hit? They got to hit something. I mean, somehow that bill's going to be paid. So, and I think this is where that may fall. But ultimately, if it just means it's an accounting issue and still somebody has got to pay for it, the somebody is probably still going to end up being the district.
Okay, thanks.
Terry, and we're not going to know the answer to this, and this is just a question that's come into my head over the last couple of weeks thinking through this too, is, if we're in a situation where we have such restrictions and we have the funding, what would it look like if we just provided the services that we're required to?
Well, that is something that many districts are talking about, and they're saying that they would not provide transportation for grades 7 through 12. That is an option that many districts around the state are considering. I think there are some issues, there's some educational issues, quite frankly, and Nancy is certainly better able to speak to them than I am. But I mean, one of the reasons you typically provide transportation K through 12, and some places where they can afford it, pre-K through 12, is you want kids to get to school. And that's your goal. That's why you offer the transportation to begin with. And I don't know that I've ever been in a district where we didn't offer the transportation at the secondary level. We charge for it in, I think, almost everywhere in the 3 states I worked. But I think that to not offer the option, I think has other detrimental effects to the district. That person, again, I'm speaking for myself, I'm not speaking for anybody else, that I think we probably would prefer to avoid if we could.
I fully understand that it's not an option that, you know, anybody would look forward to doing, but I'd be interested in understanding the financial impact on whether or not, if we didn't collect fees and provided the service to where we needed to, how much of the 68,000 do we mitigate?
Mr. Chair?
Yep.
Because students who qualify for free and reduced lunch get to ride the bus for free, and there already is an increase in families qualifying for free and reduced lunch. So the impact is, our bus routes, even if we eliminated the students who were within the 2-mile limit and could walk to school or get rides or ride their bikes or whatever, our bus routes probably would not change that much because of free and reduced, and because the students we're required to bus are on the further edges of town. Buses are, as they pick kids up, they're going by the houses of perhaps fee-paying students. So I think we could try to do some of that analysis, but my sense is that the cost savings is not worth it. Plus, you then put more kids in more families in the situation of not being able to have reliable transportation to school.
Yeah, I mean, we can certainly do the analysis for you, but I agree with Nancy. I think it's going to be, and particularly this year, it's going to be hard to predict both ways.
Well, it's going to be hard
because
because
increase in parents.
I think there's going to be people who choose not to take the bus regardless of what they're in.
I agree.
So, but I guess the question would be, and maybe the answer is there isn't, but the way that it would theoretically work is you'd have bus routes that were longer, so that you put more kids on, so potentially you have less routes because you just have kids taking, you know, you blend a couple of routes to get the same kids on the bus. Yeah, it's gonna, I mean, these aren't positive impacts, but you've got kids on the bus longer, but we are providing a service and we're not in the whole $68,000 because we can only put one kid in a seat and not 2 to 3. You
do, but you have some limits on that as well, because keep in mind, under state law, you're not supposed to have a child on the bus for more than 45 minutes. And we have a couple of routes already that are close to that. Now, if anything, you know, reducing the number of kids on the bus and reducing the number of routes might improve that. But still, if your geography increases, you've still got to factor in the concept of whether or not that entire route, you know, for that last kid is going to be 45 minutes or longer.
So I think it would be helpful if it can be done without Herculean efforts. It would be helpful to have that, because to understand how much of it could be done, even if the answer is none, because I think that would be good information to have as we look at this. Because I mean, what I'm starting to hear is, regardless, we have to run these routes regardless, and they're the exact routes that we have, and it's all basically a fixed cost because of the number of kids we have in the 2-mile outside the 2-mile radius and where they live and just the geography of the town, these routes are pretty much going to be mandated. And really the issue that's impacting us is we're now only allowed to put one kid in a seat instead of two. And that's causing us to lose the 68,000. But we don't really have any levers to change the routes or change the number of buses we send out if we're hampered by 45 minutes on a bus and where everybody lives.
Can I make a suggestion?
Sure.
Because obviously there's more analysis that you need, and I think it's primarily entered at the secondary level, though there is the idea of how many days kids are going to be on the bus. In thinking that we need to do some work both to identify parents who will be putting their children on the bus, and that primarily affects Clyde Brown, and thinking that we perhaps could do something a little out of the box, admittedly, to help us put some, I'll be blunt, put some cash in the bank. Okay. I am wondering if, based on the current fee structure, if the committee would entertain us sending out letters just to the elementary students who were required to bus, okay, and requesting that we get 50% of the fee, with an understanding that we haven't determined, the committee hasn't determined, and we can even go into detail if you want, what the final full fee will be. And it might be the 50%. I recognize that might be the full fee. But there's a whole bunch of reasons why getting some registrations and also, frankly, getting some cash into the fund would be advantageous. And usually if somebody has to put some money forward, they're fairly serious about putting their child on the bus.
Mr. Chair.
Yep.
So in hearing Terry's thought and proposal there, I was wondering, when you needed the funds by, could you potentially just send out a registration to see who's interested and willing to take the bus, and then us to figure out later in a little bit how much we could potentially charge when we know more about the schedule of the school? Maybe there's like a $50 registration fee so that we know that they're serious about potentially signing their kid up, instead of 50% of a number that we don't know. I don't know.
We certainly could do it that way. I think the reason that I'm trying to come up with some factor of our current fees is because, in theory, it won't be less than our current fees. Okay.
But that's not true, because in theory, if kids are going to school half the time.
Well, no, but I spoke badly, Robin.
Okay.
I apologize. It won't be less than 50% of our current fees.
Okay, got it.
I find it hard to believe it will be less than 50% of our current fees. And I apologize for that misstatement. The reason that I use that figure, and the reason that there's two reasons for getting these registrations in now. And one is, quite frankly, any cash that we get in before June 30th helps offset the refund, quite honestly. And the $50 would do that as well, but it will obviously be a lower amount. And the second is, again, I've used lower amounts in the past in other districts for registration. And then what I have is I have a number of people back out. So generally speaking, if somebody has to commit a significant amount of money to the situation, they're serious about putting their child on the bus. But we can work with anything the committee wants.
So I guess speaking as a parent that puts their kid on the bus, I struggle with not knowing what the schedule is going to be next year to commit to something. But if I need to sign up for the bus, knowing that that has to be now, so that I guess bus routes can be planned now, I would, I think, be more willing to put a little bit forward as opposed to having then all of a sudden being like, well, the fees are going to be X amount of dollars now. I don't know. I'm trying to like see it as a parent and understand like, well, they don't know what they're doing. So why are they charging me this money? Or they don't know what school is going to look like. So why is the money going up? So I'm struggling as a parent to understand what I guess what I would do, because we don't know what we're doing as a group.
We can certainly do it that way, or we can just plain hold off. I mean, again.
I guess like when do you have to know if people are riding the bus? Like what is that drop dead date to know?
We usually know by now.
I understand that, but given our situation, we don't. And so now looking at this, like what is that drop dead deadline that we need to know if people are taking the bus, A, and for routes and planning, and B, for funding?
Well, as far as the fees go, that's in a revolving fund, and by its very definition, it's a rollover type of situation. Again, it will mean that the refund will probably impact the operating fund, but that's neither here nor there. We can make that happen. So I would say, as far as knowing if somebody's going to ride the bus or not, I would say probably the middle of July is our drop dead date, because we may find ourselves creating 2 to 4 routes. Okay. Because essentially, if we have an every other week scenario or split days or all kinds of different scenarios that are out there, you would talk about conceivably 2 routes for each tier. So that's a total of 4 routes. And, normally we're creating a route for the elementary and a route for the secondary.
Sure. But if we don't know what school is looking like until the middle of July, then the routes are neither here nor there at this point, right?
Well, I certainly hope we know before the middle of July, because quite honestly, Nancy and every other superintendent in the state are going to be pulling their hair out. And I know some of the superintendents, and they don't have much hair to pull out.
And the parents.
That's true.
Mr. Chair,
Mrs. Roach.
does it make sense saying, giving that Terry just said that we may have just a little bit of time to figure this out, not a lot, but a little, that we, knowing that we're going to have a little, some more information come out this week about what school's going to look like, how about we hold off until our next meeting to make this call or to decide whether we're going to put out the registration? With that, Terry, is that a good compromise? You think that would still be okay?
I think again, we're all kind of learning to, I think Nancy Mott is saying we're learning to fly the plane as it's in the air.
Yeah.
So I think that's fine. Again, we'll work with it, whatever the committee's comfortable with. I think I've already kind of informally put out the word that we probably want to have a meeting on the 29th anyways, for a couple of different reasons. And, I think we could try to keep this to be a relatively focused and brief discussion.
Maybe we just, because of that, send out some sort of just quick memo or quick little blurb to the parents saying, hey, we're still working on it. We know you're waiting. We should have this wrapped up in the next few weeks.
I can work with Nancy to figure out a communication we can send out to parents.
Perfect.
Good.
All right. Okay. Anybody else on that topic, or are we good? All right, so we will get that communication out. We will be posted for June 29th, which is also town meeting. So we could coordinate our timing around that if we have information and wanted to act on this, we could do that.
Okay.
We could do that then. Next up is reorganization of the school committee. So normally we do this at the first meeting after town election, But since town election's been pushed to next Monday, actually, and both candidate Denise and Carrie are both running unopposed, then we decided that instead of waiting, we would just go ahead and do the reorg in advance of the election, since the outcome is pretty straightforward. So the two positions that we elect each year are chair and secretary. And so I would start by taking a motion or nomination for chair.
Mr. Chair,
Mr. Catalano.
before I make a nomination, don't we normally have the candidates up for re-election say a few words, not for either the chair or for secretary, but just why they want to continue to be a school committee member? I'm not sure. It feels like we've done that for years and years. Yourself, myself, like, have we stopped that fine tradition?
We have a lot on the schedule today, Steve. Maybe we should do that. A thank you after the election.
Okay, I'm open for that. I'd like to put that on the next agenda item. Mr. Chair.
Mr. Catalano.
I would like to nominate Miss Kerry Ann Roach to be the next school committee chairperson.
Second.
It's been moved and seconded. Any further discussion? All those in
Clear.
favor?
Aye.
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 All right. Carrie, it's your show.
Madam
Wow,
Chair.
that was quick.
Madam
Mr.
Chair.
Catalano.
Except
Enjoy
now
this.
we don't get to actually get up and move chairs and do the whole
I
thing.
know.
Yeah, right.
You don't get a new name tag.
The window
Yeah.
screens don't even move.
I know. I didn't even get my square moved down by Nancy.
Enjoy. The next 30 seconds is the best part of the next year of your life. So, Madam Chair,
Mr. Catalano.
I'd like to nominate Ms. Briggs to be the secretary for the
Second.
upcoming school year.
It has been,
Second.
so we have Robin nominated as the secretary. It has been moved and seconded. Any discussion?
Robin's done an excellent job since coming on the committee with the Google and the notes. We are much more organized, and she's done an excellent job, and I'd love to see her continue to do that work.
Thanks.
So all in favor for Robin continuing as the school committee secretary?
Aye.
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 I guess
Anyone
I too.
opposed? It has passed. Congratulations, Robin.
Thanks. Congrats, Carrie.
Okay, so we'll keep going down the agenda. We have consideration to appoint the Education Collaborative Board member for 2021. Historically, this has been the superintendent, unless anyone has any reason to change it. Oh, go ahead, Nancy. You're on chair. You're on.
The tech coordinator, the representative to the tech collaborative is not the superintendent. It's usually a committee member.
Oh,
And
that's my fault. I
Thanks,
thought
Mark.
I got them confused. My fault.
That's
I got them
okay.
confused.
I'm on the board of the Accept Collaborative, but we have two collaboratives, and a school committee member is generally the member of the tech collaborative. They're
Okay.
easier to attend now that they're remote.
I'm
Will
sure.
they stay virtual?
Oh, yeah, that's true.
Will
Nancy, do you know if they're going to
virtual?
stay virtual?
For
For the meetings?
I do not know what the fall will bring. No, I don't know
Okay.
that.
Okay. Do we have a school committee member that would like to volunteer?
So they're Friday mornings, usually from like 8:15 to 10 or something like that. So they're not the most convenient in terms of work hours. Just as an FYI.
Robin, you're out because yeah. Mark, was this you? Did you do this last year?
It was, and I at one point my schedule was easier on Friday mornings, and then it flipped and it wasn't. So there weren't a ton that I was able to attend until they went virtual.
Is it possible that we can share this and rotate?
We can. I don't
Or does it
know
need to be
because
one?
they have it as set individuals for voting members. So it's just, I think there's probably questions that we could ask. We could put somebody. I mean, I know, like, I'd be fine. I can stay as the voted person unless you want to do it. I can just tell you, it just depends on, like, they're just not ideal times unless you can take every Friday, they're monthly or quarterly, and unless you can take that Friday morning off and do it when they're in person, it's just tough.
Yeah, I know I can't.
Yeah.
So why don't we keep it free with you for now?
Yeah, and we can do some research to see if we can have an alternating, or if it's just me, then it just is what it is.
Okay.
Maybe we can see if they can move the time.
I know.
They won't be able to move the time. I did it for a couple of years, I think, before Steve took it, and then I think, Mark, you did. So yours was just this last year. They moved the time a little bit, but they've had a lot of discussion about the time. It's not going to move.
Do we need to vote on this?
We do, just because it's for the set fiscal year.
Okay.
Madam Chair,
Mr. Catalano.
I make a motion to appoint Mark Conroy as the school committee rep on tech for the FY21 year.
Second.
Been moved and seconded. Any further discussion? All in favor?
Aye.
Aye.
Thanks, Mark.
Thank you, Mark.
Mark.
Okay, consideration for end of year transfers. Terry.
Okay. You have those as part of the financial report. And what I would tell you is, at the moment, I would tell you they're there for really more your consideration for us to handle on the 29th, preferably.
Okay.
These are estimated at the moment. And I did the financial report, and we can talk a little bit more about it when we do the financial report. But you'll notice that I put them on the financial report so you could get a better idea of where they're coming and going to. And I tried to provide notes as well. My recollection is it's just under $2 million of transfers between all the lines, which sounds like a lot, but that's just more totaling up the ins and outs. And I'm trying to get to, there we go. Nope, that's not it. I'm still trying to find the financial report here. There we go. There we go. So as you go through, you'll see a green column of transfers in. That would be the money that would be going into a line to balance that line. You'll see a red column, which is transfers out. That would be a column where there's an expected surplus. We're going to take money from that. And then it all comes down at the bottom. And if I get there reasonably fast, actually it was more than that. I'm thinking back to an earlier one when I was working on it. So it's just under 4 million in ins and outs of transfers between the lines at the moment. It will be somewhere in that vicinity. Just the actual amounts may change as we get to after we get the final postings. The thing I'm really waiting on is for final salary postings.
Okay. So this isn't something we can do this tonight.
You could give me the authority for up to this amount currently. I would still probably be coming back to you on the 29th for some refinement, because I won't do these until like for right now, the balloon pays are not posted by line. And so those will hit, various teacher lines. So that's why I say that'll affect some of this as far as what the numbers will actually look like. Same thing for, there's, inevitably there's some things we will end up unencumbering. There's some things we will end up encumbering. And that's why I say the 29th is actually a better time
Yeah.
to approve these.
Let's hold off as long as the rest of the committee is okay with that. I know that we're going to want to, kind of get into it a little bit and ask a lot of questions. And I know we have, some people waiting to hear about what school's going to look like in the fall. So I think we'll have more time to get into it if we wait.
Yeah, and if you have it now, you have time. You have a couple of weeks to look at it and digest your questions.
Yep. Okay.
Yep.
All right, so we'll hold off on year-end transfers. So let's do this. Let's skip the next two items and go right to the guidance for fall. Nancy, if that's okay with you, knowing that we have people on YouTube that's what they're here for. So if you are okay with that, why don't we skip right down to that, and then we'll go back to the other two action items. You're on mute.
Okay. I thank the administrative team for joining me tonight in case there are questions that are specific to a certain area or a certain building or a certain program. What I'm going to do is share my screen for a presentation, and then we'll take questions at the end. People from the public can type their questions in to the chat feature on YouTube, and then we will actually transfer those to our Zoom chat and be able to answer your questions, hopefully. So I'm going to share my screen first. Wait, I have to get on the right. Okay, there it is. And then I'm presenting. So basically, oh, that's the last slide instead of the first slide. Let me stop sharing, sorry. Get it on the right slide. Okay. Well, I'll just go back. Pardon me for that glitch. Now, can you see it? No?
Not yet, Nancy. Not yet. Nope.
Okay. Now I think I'm on my first slide. I apologize, and I'm going to share screen. Okay, there we go. And present. Okay, so we have been anxiously awaiting for a few weeks now the guidance from the Department of Education. The Department of Education has a working group that is a combination of teacher unions, Department of Public Health, a lot of medical professionals and other professionals in in strategic planning, that is helping them put together their recommendations for next fall. During that time, though, we have CDC guidance from May, and then we received recently some guidance on summer programming. And the summer programming guidance follows the CDC guidance fairly closely. So the goals of our presentation tonight are to kind of review a little bit quickly the CDC guidance that we have so far and some of the research on remote learning, and provide the committee and the public with some of the potential concepts for fall. And I have to say the commissioner has had weekly meetings with superintendents, and things have been changing. They've been shifting. So it'll be very interesting. We hope to have the guidance by Friday. It might be delayed until early next week though. So what we will not address in today's presentation are the PPE, the personal protection equipment, etc., the details on that. We won't get into specifics on the DESE guidance because that is coming later this week. We will not talk about preschool because that has early childhood guidance that is a little bit different, and just today we got an update on that. So we will be talking about preschool programming later. Transportation will be determined by the DESE guidance. He's been very clear that transportation they will have strong regulations or guidance that we must follow on that. And then we all know that there will probably be some students whose families choose to not have them attend school in the fall. So we're not going to talk this evening about students who require, for medical or whatever reasons, who require 100% remote learning environment. Department of Ed is developing guidelines for that, and perhaps some state level resources and programs that will assist with that. So first of all, it's been quite the journey, and I have to thank everybody, the staff, the teachers, the paraprofessionals, secretaries, custodians, everybody, our food service, everybody has really stepped to the plate to provide, to meet students' needs and meet families' needs. And our teachers were very well positioned compared with other districts. And we sent out earlier this week an article, a national article about our remote learning. We use two learning platforms, It's Learning and Google Classroom, depending on the teacher's preference. And because we have about 10 years of experience doing blended hybrid learning with a lot of technology integration, our teachers were very adept, or more adept than otherwise would be, with moving to a remote environment. Not that they didn't have a learning curve too, because we all did. You know, I have to say before this, I never had really participated or run a lot of remote meetings. And so now we're all more adept at this. The research, so anyway, a big thank you to everybody, and also to parents who really stepped up and were great partners and very positive. The feedback we've gotten, the letters, emails I've gotten have all been very positive and appreciative from parents. And that makes a huge difference for the staff, that our staff tried their hardest, but also they felt that parents were really appreciative. And I think that's an indication of the kind of families we have in Millis. So we really appreciate that. The research indicates, and we all know, we've experienced it, that virtual learning does not replace face-to-face learning in terms of either student well-being or academic progress. For the most part, it just can't compare. Students need to be in school. We need students to be in school. Everybody missed each other terribly, and there is an impact to academic progress, especially for younger students, and especially students with more special needs, students with ADHD perhaps, and English language learners. They were all impacted more than perhaps older students. We've sent out several surveys, and the principals have done a wonderful job touching base with not only the students and the staff, but also the families, and tried to integrate that feedback into changes that we were able to make along the way. So generally very positive, but we all know that it's not perfect by any means. We do know that there have been other crises in the past. Hurricane Katrina, for example, that had schools out of session for quite a while. And there's good research that after school, kids get back in school, a remedial approach is not as effective as an accelerating approach, in which, so rather than, say a fourth grader comes into school next year, we're not going to go back and reteach a lot of third grade curriculum, because there was learning that was happening. What we're going to be able to do is assess where kids are and teach the fourth grade curriculum. If there are gaps, something they missed, and the fallacy is that kids were all on the same page anyway. So kids will be perhaps a little more spread out in terms of the learning continuum. And teachers will do mini lessons and small groups to fill the gaps that are the essential pieces. But it's not a remedial approach. So this spring, we've had a lot of good virtual celebrations and parades. We focused all along on student connections, because that social emotional learning foundation is critical to learning, and kids, making sure kids were okay and their well-being. In the spring, it's important to have the feeling of closure for students. I know I have as some of you do, a senior in high school, and it's been really hard for them to not have that closure. So we're working hard to celebrate in very hopefully in-person ways when we get into phase 3 for the graduates, and in socially distant and appropriate ways with masks, with all kids, to celebrate the end of the year and their accomplishments. We have started planning advisory groups, and those are listed on this slide. And then we will have subgroups, of course, once we, certain things will have different implementations in each building depending on the guidelines. But I wanted to ask the principals, starting with Joe Russo, to speak a little bit about the surveys that they sent out this week and already have good responses for. Joe?
Sure. So the three of us, the three principals, sent out a similar survey to all families. Obviously, it was designated to, different areas have different questions, but in general, it was really sort of a summary of how's this experience been for you and your family. And so we've gotten back, I said 37 early, now we're close to 50. It just went out yesterday. We encourage people to continue to put information in for us. But in general, 50% of the people who responded thought that their children were engaged by the activities. About 27% said they were neutral, and only 70% said there was low engagement. We had at the elementary level, we asked how much was done independently, how much was done with help. And for the elementary, 60% of the respondents said that their children needed adult supervision to sort of help them get through. Not surprising. So parents have learned to be teachers this year, which was one of the outcomes. When we asked about what worked well or what didn't work well, that came out as both. What people really appreciated about this time was family time and having that opportunity to learn, to see how their children learn. That was definitely a benefit. One of the things that they wished for more, they wished to have more time with teachers, more face-to-face meetings if we were going to continue this. And that they certainly want smaller groups seems to work better for younger kids. The whole class sessions were okay, but a little chaotic. And I'll tell you, having been on them, when you have kids showing up with their pets or hanging off the couch upside down or coming in from the swimming pool, it's not the best learning environment, obviously. So we want to do a little bit of work with that in the fall. They appreciated the teachers and the work that they did. They particularly enjoyed the special education and the work the special educators did with the families who were partaking in that services. They really liked the social emotional components with the school counselors. That was really helpful. And there were some things that that they didn't like. They wanted to have, again, more contact with teachers. They were concerned about just some regression of their students, obviously. But on the flip side, they enjoyed the flexibility in the schedule. They enjoyed watching how their kids learn, as I said, and the choice boards they seem to enjoy. So overall, it was a positive experience for this segment of time. And I think going forward, if there's more remote, we're going to have to look at more opportunities for face-to-face learning with teachers, and making sure that there are those connections, that parents are involved in the connections, and doing a little bit more of the teaching, maybe taking a little bit more off the plate of the parents. Certainly makes some sense.
Maureen?
Good evening, everybody. So we also sent a survey out to parents on Monday, and we surveyed our students and our staff last week as well to collect as much data as we possibly could to help us just evaluate the remote learning experience for students, for families, and begin to plan for the unknown. As of this evening, we received 56 responses. So, we still have a long way to go. We sent out another link tonight on our listserv and hoping for more feedback. Knowing the family perspective will certainly assist us in planning for a different kind of remote learning, one that's not an emergency response to a pandemic. So overall, there was a fair amount of consensus through comments from both parents and students and teachers about increasing live instructional lessons by teachers. Although there were also some students and parents who reported that their children didn't like the live lessons and preferred to work independently. There was a fair amount, like Joe said, of support for small group virtual meetings. So students could maintain connections with their peers, and teachers really liked the smaller groups because they felt the kids were more engaged and more learning could happen. About 80% on the parent survey said their students completed their work completely independently in the middle school, yet at the other end of the spectrum, we had students who resisted tremendously at home and needed a great deal of support and help. Middle school students are certainly challenged by organization and executive functioning, and we know that we need to provide a little more structure if we're going to continue this kind of instruction in the future. In terms of communication, the weekly Monday emails and the online learning platforms, the Google Meets and the weekly newsletters were reported to be effective for most people. What was particularly effective was the written and the verbal communication and feedback from the teachers, the individual check-ins with students and families, and that had a positive impact and a good response from families. As Joe said, the personal one-on-one or the small group attention by specialists, special educators, our paraprofessionals were wonderful. The counselors, all of those interactions in small groups or one-to-one were especially helpful to families who received that support. And according to just people who have responded so far, about 20% of those participated in some of the social emotional learning supports that we provided. And when asked what would be helpful for next year, about 70% said they would like their children to participate in some group sessions with the counselor or supports in the social emotional learning realm. Some of the positives that came out, as Joe said, a large majority of people said it was nice to spend more time with family. There was a slower pace, just the joy of being together. Some people really enjoyed observing their children learning, and they got a better understanding of how they learned, and parents felt a little more involved. Students reported by both parents and self-report that they were a little less stressed. They felt less pressure. They became more independent and more resourceful, and they learned to be accountable. And then, of course, there were a few people who just reported they were just trying to survive. It was very challenging. It was very difficult. They didn't like it. The students were frustrated. They missed their friends, and they kind of shut down. So we need to think about how we're going to really connect with those. Some aspects that people would like to see us change, and all of these we've talked about at length as a staff, similar to what Joe said, a little more live direct instruction from teachers so it feels more like school, an increased structure to the school day, some more smaller group collaborative projects between students that they can work on together, an expectation for more consistent mandatory participation. This was, emergency remote learning. We did not know whether a lot of families were going to experience health issues, and it was going to be really difficult. So we would approach it, I think, in a little different way in the fall if this was the way school was going to be. And finally, a more streamlined workflow and a little bit of people struggle a little to navigate through all of the technology and the email communication. So we've talked about how we could streamline that. So to summarize the parent survey so far and feelings about how we approached it, for some there was too much work and it was overwhelming, and for some there was not enough. For some, the flexible structure and nature of it worked very well for their family situation, and for others it wasn't the best way to approach it. Again, some liked live interactive Google meetings and some didn't. Our students had a wide variety of responses as well. Most of them overwhelmingly reported that they liked having control over when and where and how they got to do their work. They loved being able to work at their own pace, so they didn't feel the pressure to finish something by the end of the class period, or watching all their peers being finished and they were still working. Many of them really thrived because they learned to ask for help, and they were willing to accept help in a one-to-one on a meeting when there was nobody else around. So what have we learned overall? Children and families, as we know, have vastly different personalized learning needs, and what works for one doesn't necessarily work for another. And I think the inequity was magnified in this situation. So in a school setting, the teachers, can be immediately responsive, and that's not so easy during remote learning situations. We really do hope and we wish that we could be back in school all together in the fall, or at least see our students a good portion of the time. We know there's a likelihood that we will not, so we need to design a structure for remote learning that has more direct instruction, a little bit more tiered support, more personalized opportunities, as Nancy said, acceleration, and something that's a little maybe easier for families to navigate. Parents would like some training on some of our tools, technology tools, so that'll be in the works. And we'll be considering all of the responses from students, families, teachers, in trying to design something that's a robust learning experience online for the fall, if that's where we need to go. And hopefully we can meet everyone's needs. I'll just say it's not an easy task, but I think we're up for the challenge.
Thank you, Maureen. Bob?
Yeah, we have the high school parent survey. We had right up until now 36 parents who've responded. A lot of the responses are similar to what you heard from Maureen and Joe. In terms of level of engagement, we had 31% of our parents reporting their kids had a high level of engagement, and 13% said we're at the other extreme, a low level of engagement. we had the majority of respondents said that their students were able to access the assignments and work on them independently. We had 70% parents respond that kids were able to complete most assignments independently. Parents the respondents seemed to really appreciate the Google Meet, the live sessions, and that was a pretty common comment on things they'd like to see increased if we're doing remote learning in the fall. There was some challenge with the different platforms that are used, Google Classroom, It's Learning. So some parents mentioned that as a challenge for them. We also surveyed the kids, and in some ways, those surveys mirrored each other, but in some other ways they did not. It was kind of interesting that many of the parents talked about wanting a more set schedule, with classes starting at 8 o'clock and so forth. And many kids commented that, as Maureen said, they liked the idea of being able to work on their own schedule, sleeping a little later, which, we know the research on sleep and teenagers. So a number of the kids commented on that. Both parents and students felt like there should be more accountability if we, do remote learning next year, or if there are parts of our year that are remote learning. And certainly, again, that's something that we're planning for. And one of the students commented, I really need to be motivated to do my work. And so I would have liked more accountability. I think I would have done more work if there were more accountability. And again, most of the parents said they were getting through, but obviously, like all of us, the ultimate desire would be for a safe reopening of school with kids in the building and teachers in the building. And, that's certainly our hope. But the feedback will be very helpful to us in planning for whatever eventuality we have next year.
Thank you, Bob. So our advisory groups that we've set up are focused on certain areas, and we are getting organized with teachers joining those groups now for a focus on figuring out the logistics as soon as we get the guidance, the logistics and the implementation of that guidance for these categories, the remote learning or hybrid learning operations such as food service, transportation, extended day. Facilities will be a big focus, with informed by the health and wellness. Our nurses have done a great job, and they collaborate with the Department of Public Health. And I have to say, our Department of Public Health in Millis is really wonderful. And we appreciate them because I just have experiences through my daughter of other Department of Public Healths in other towns, and makes me really appreciate the Millis Department of Public Health. So thank you, John McVeigh and the nurse for your collaborative approach. Obviously, there will be budget and human resource impacts, as well as we're hoping to have some form of athletics even in the fall. We'll see. And of course, there will be strong guidance. Then there will be from that some subgroups that will be building based with more teacher input, and also parents on the implementation, perhaps parents from our school site councils or other volunteers to help with talking through the myriad details of implementation of what it might look like in the fall. So the CDC guidance, I'm going to kind of skim through these pretty quickly because there is, as you know, probably many people are familiar with this. There is a recommendation that students stay in cohorts and not mix much. So that's fairly, well, it's easier at the elementary level than it is at the middle high school level, but it does make there are implications for that, and keeping kids with a group of people so that there's not cross-contamination among many groups, and that makes tracing hard if there are cases of COVID-19 in the fall. So that has implications. Extracurriculars, athletics, the MIAA has been working on that, but the DESE will have some guidance that we will need to follow if we're able to have athletics. All kinds of interesting creative ideas are floating. Obviously, large group gatherings like the field trips we go on to, you know, I think of the 8th grade field trip to go to see you know, the Christmas Carol in Providence at the Trinity Theater. Those types of things will probably not happen because we'll be limiting large gatherings and not having large gatherings in school. They recommend that we restrict the building so there's not a lot of visitors or volunteers coming in. That seating, you've all heard this, be at least 6 feet apart. And so there's implications for that. And we've been moving furniture around and playing around with different configurations to see what can be possible. I have to say, it's really wonderful to have a brand new elementary building that is spacious, because it makes it easier, and there are flex spaces in Clyde Brown that the middle and high school don't have. So the flex spaces for small groups and our media centers in the center of each wing make planning for something like this easier than at the middle high school. The communal spaces they recommend, like cafeteria, not be used, the auditorium, the gym, you know, things like that will probably, we're talking about anyway, converting into different types of uses rather than, there will not be probably a kid sitting side by side having lunch as they're used to. So that has an implication for meals probably being in the classrooms, which has an implication for cleaning and trying to keep the building clean. So all of these are things we've been talking about. Shared materials and, you know, math manipulatives, or crayons and markers and rulers and all those scissors, all those things that elementary kids share, that is discouraged and will not be allowed probably. Also robotics, you think of the hands-on robotics and coding, electronic devices that in the past had been shared will be assigned. We're fortunate in Millis with the building project and with the support of the town that we do have a lot of devices. So when we had to shift to 100% remote learning, we were able to provide those devices to kids at home if they needed them and send them home. So we're, you know, we may need to do some purchasing, but we're mostly repurposing things like the iPad cards that were more for project-based learning might get repurposed and be assigned to an individual child and and there will not be sharing of devices, things like that. So the key takeaways, just to go quickly, there will need to be fewer students in classrooms, additional spaces that were normally used for something will be repurposed or need to be repurposed. We'll need to have controlled entry and exit. We've already purchased and begun ordering a lot of the hand sanitizer, the hand sanitizing stations, things like that, as kids enter. And we'll be planning that carefully. Probably students will not be moving around as much, so we'll need to plan movement breaks. Students will stay put in a space, and teachers may be the ones that move more, which is difficult at the high school level, to say the least, because kids mix. You know, you don't travel with the same group of kids, but up through 8th grade, it's a little bit easier. High school, that'll be a challenge. We talked about common materials and common communal areas will not be, that will be not allowed. Transportation and the meal service, those are going to be very difficult challenges. And all of this in a year where we may have reduced revenue. So it's going to be a real challenge. It's going to take all our creativity and planning. From what we know right now, I'd say it's a fair assessment to say that it will not be feasible to have all our students in and have school as normal. That is just not going to be possible given the guidance that we're going to receive and have received so far. So we will be doing many things to make it a less dense situation, keep kids and adults healthy and safe. And that's where the challenge is going to fall. It's obviously an imperfect situation, and we'll do our best. Many of these details will be subject to impact bargaining or bargaining around working conditions, as we should have the DESE guidance soon. Some people have said, made comments like, well, you can just ignore the DESE guidance, but we can't because our funding, some of it comes directly through DESE. And we can apply for a waiver of some of the elements that are going to be coming out, but it may not be approved. So, and the waivers so far, we'll find out more later in the week, but the waivers would be, for example, areas, the western part of the state, or areas where they really have had virtually no cases, they may be able to relax more, whereas more urban areas where they have a high concentration of cases may need to stay more remote. Obviously, we will need to think carefully about our academic programming. We will need to very quickly survey as to what percentage of our students do parents plan to send to school, and what percentage do parents plan to keep home, and then what percentage of those will plan on taking the bus. And then the new normal is, the old model is just not going to be possible probably, which is upsetting to pretty much everybody, because I think we all recognize that there are many beloved aspects of school, and not everything's perfect, but kids, generally the feedback is kids really miss school, and certainly parents miss having their kids go to school. So we will be gathering more feedback, and from the school committee as well, to have that dialogue and see what works best. Advisory working groups are organized, and we need to focus on what's best for students. And obviously there are health implications to all of this. So, whoops, sorry. Our goal is to collaborate and utilize all our collective resources to figure out how to try to ensure the best long-term outcomes for students. And I think, the Millis Public Schools, staff have done a great job connecting with kids and having that social, emotional, small school, big family. And that's a very important aspect. It's a foundational aspect. And without that, the learning is much harder. Kids need that social, emotional wellness to feel, to be able to grapple with learning and challenges. So there are two main models that have been talked about that people have been, floating ideas around. One is kind of an alternating model, whether it's alternating week A, week B, or alternating part of the week. Some kids go to school Monday, Tuesday, and other kids go Thursday, Fridays, with some deep cleaning in between, or it's Wednesday, Thursday with Friday for all the planning and the remote. But there are different alternating schedules that have been proposed. With the commissioner has said we need to think about those students, special needs, English language learners, and young students who may need more face-to-face. The benefits are that, we've been in 100% remote, so coming back to school for half the time probably is not a real, it's a positive thing. Transportation is a challenge in this model, whether it's A, B, or every other, 2 days on and 2 days off. We know remote learning is hardest for the youngest kids, preschool, kindergarten, first grade. That's really hard. So the other model is one that takes into account the differentiation of grade level bands and has more time in school for younger children and less time for older students who are better equipped to handle a remote learning environment. And so this is one that has more disruption to space and schedules, but is more perhaps developmentally appropriate. And that might look like something these are, again, just ideas. They're conjecturing. If kindergarten were half-time and, kindergarten, everybody was just half-time, then perhaps grades 1, 2, and 3 could all fit in the Clyde Brown building using various spaces, but classes would basically have to be divided in half. So I'll just use one example. A fourth grade classroom, instead of being in one classroom, needs 2. So obviously it spreads everything out. It might mean then that some grades move into the middle high school because they are then more remote. So that is a real logistical nightmare in moving materials and setting up classrooms differently, but it's certainly something that I think, it might be the recommendation. So we've been talking about it. I think I just spoke to mostly it's a benefit to have younger kids in the building more. But the challenges will be staffing as well. When you take one fourth grade classroom that usually has one teacher and you split it into 2 spaces, you need an adult in each room. Our kids are really good, but they're not that good. And we need to have an adult in each space that kids are in. And one of the benefits we've found, though, is that teams are working really well together and collaborating a tremendous amount. So there's great consistency across the fourth grade and across the 5th grade and the 2nd grade. And they're really planning and collaborating a lot and I think that'll continue. It's one of the benefits of any crisis, I guess, people pull together. So the split day model of having half the kids come in the morning and half the kids in the afternoon is just not one that seems feasible for many reasons. The transportation, the cleaning that would need to happen, seems like it's probably not a feasible model, but we'll see. So given the uncertainty of all this, you heard the principals were talking a lot about, even if some aspect of our program next year is remote learning, even if it's only 1 day a week or certain times, we want to improve that. So we're already talking, and teachers have learned a tremendous amount. We have some professional development happening this summer that all teachers will be doing, called the Modern Classroom Essentials, that basically ensures that everybody has hopefully the tools they need. But there will obviously be many operational logistics to figure out, depending on what the guidance is from the Department of Ed. Staffing, we have, there will be, staffing challenges. There are some adults that might have health challenges or might be immune compromised, etc. We will probably need to have more flexibility in who is utilizing our paraprofessionals and substitute teachers, etc. The Department of Ed has relaxed the licensure requirements a little bit so that new teachers graduating we can still hire them even if they haven't been able to complete that last piece of their licensure. So we will also need to provide time for staff to plan more, because this is all new, and they've done a great job so far, but we all recognize that we want to do an even better job in the fall. So next year, obviously, and my pictures are covering up part of the slide, but I mentioned the assessment that will need to happen, the formative assessment, not testing so much as figuring out where kids are, what their strengths are. Luckily, we're a standards-based environment with, and teachers are, and that was fortunate when the Department of Ed came out with saying, focus on the essential power standards. Our teachers knew exactly what those were and were solid in a standards-based environment. So we'll need to plan a little bit more for movement breaks. Obviously, utilizing the outside, that's another wonderful thing Clyde Brown has, is some outdoor learning environments that are really ideal for this type of situation. So that's it. That's a lot to consider. And we will all be eagerly awaiting the guidance as it comes to us.
Nancy, do we have any questions from anyone that's watching on YouTube?
Yeah, let's see if...
Oh, Dave, if you can take a look. No questions. I'm a little surprised at that. So I'd say thank you. That was some great information. I don't think there's anybody here that doesn't wish that we could go back to normal. But the reality is that that's most likely not going to happen. So we do have to plan for the most stringent scenarios and hope that we don't have to do that, but we need to plan for it, and it does look like we're going to have some sort of hybrid model. So, thank you for starting this planning session and getting this started. And I guess we'll continue this dialogue as information comes out. Okay, was there any questions from the rest of the committee on next year? All right, I'll check the chat one more time. Nope. Okay. Well, thank you, everyone. Yep, there is a question. Will there be an effort to keep siblings on the same schedule?
Yes, absolutely.
Yeah, I would hope so.
One of the things we realize is, elementary schools provide childcare for a lot of workers. And we did a quick count, and we think we have over 50 children of teachers. So our teachers are parents as well as, and so, everybody is going to do our best to recognize that families need to stay intact. And so bus routing will be a good way to do it, I think, because, or by the alphabet. And then the other thing that we're doing as a region, I mentioned we're part of the ACCEPT and the Tech Collaborative, and then part of a round table group called the Tri-County Superintendents Group. And we're all going to try to have similar plans as well. I think the state guidance will determine probably what that is, but to figure out a way, kind of like we do on snow days, that there's a more cohesive approach in our region, which we hope will help with the childcare aspects of school for elementary kids and for siblings who then take care of elementary kids when they're home.
There's one other question. How are the children in the immersion program going to be assisted?
There is no change to the immersion model. We generally, there's two types of assistance in immersion. We have paraprofessional that helps with the various classes. Yanette Alonso has been that teacher. She filled in for us very well and beautifully as a FLES teacher this year. But we also have another level of assistance that we just got word from the Spanish government that we should have auxiliares or Spanish teaching assistants who come to us, at least one, we hope. And we're working out, obviously it has to be after the travel ban is lifted and there will be a quarantine period, but we should be able to have Spanish assistance from the Spanish government as well. So we will have the same number of paraprofessionals or assistants for immersion that we've always had.
There was another follow-up on immersion question, and I can take this one, Nancy. We were informed that the teacher was not rehired due to budget cuts, and based on what we've been told this evening, she is needed more than ever. So I will say that's a personnel matter, and we typically do not, where I appreciate the question, we typically don't comment on personnel matters. Okay, so that looks like it is the last question. I'll give it one more minute or a few more seconds. Okay, well, thank you everyone for joining, and thank you for that update.
Thank you.
So we'll go back to our action items. Next thing we have is consideration for summer athletic training program. So if I take a look at that memo, and I know Mr. Grant is still on the call here too. I don't know if you want to give us a little explanation on that one?
Sure. Each summer, we run a conditioning clinic throughout the summer for all sports, both boys and girls teams. And we're looking to hopefully start that on July 13th, which would be the last week of phase 3. And we would be utilizing the same protocols that we'd be utilized by Dave Fallon with his basketball clinic, although we'll have a couple more liberties since the majority of our workouts are outside. And then in the second week of gut clinic will be the first week, hopefully, if everything starts on time phase-wise, of phase 4, which allows us additional liberties, although we, talking with Olivia, will probably stay more within the phase 3 and not take too many risks, at least not right away, as we continue to try to practice some consistency and routine with the kids. The parking spots act as natural spacing. So each athlete would have its own parking spot, which would keep the spacing the way it is. And we would also be able to break the groups up based on last year's average numbers of 39 to 43 per morning. One group would be in the parking lot and one group would be out on the track. And then within those two groups, the parking lot, everybody can work out at the same time. But on the track, pending the numbers, we would split it up. So we would have 10 on the track at one time, 10 on a rest break, 10 on the track the next time, 10 on a rest break. So we try and keep the number of people on the track to a minimal so we can have an inside and outside lane and have proper and safe spacing. So generally, we're looking for the school committees to make you aware of our intent and to ask for your permission to continue with the planning for that to begin on July 13th, Monday.
So it does sound like you guys are staying within the guidelines, and we know with, outdoor activity, the risks are lower anyway. So I would open it up to the committee for any further discussion or a motion.
Madam Chair,
Mr. Conroy.
I would make a motion that we authorize and approve the opening or the running of gut clinic starting July 13th through whatever their regular, I think it's mid-August usually, under the guidelines according to the phases of opening under the state regulations.
Second.
It has been moved and seconded. Any further discussion? All in favor?
Aye.
Aye. All right, motion carries. Thank you.
Thank you very much, everybody. Appreciate it.
Thank you.
Thank you.
Thanks.
Okay, so we will move to consideration for the continuation of the summer meal program. Nancy or Terry, would you like to?
Terry, do you want to speak to that?
Yeah, I think I can be brief. As you know, there was a waiver that was granted for the spring, which allowed us to feed all students and get full reimbursement for them. That waiver has been continued through the summer, and Millis can continue a summer feeding program. It's an excellent time to pilot one. We have had requests from families to find out if we were going to continue to do summer feeding. And we presented you with a budget. It's basically a break-even proposition, but we also do have a little bit of grant money that we can use as sort of a protection if our numbers are a little bit off. So we do believe we can do this without losing any money for the food service program. And we think it would be an excellent benefit to our students and their families.
So we've gotten some interest from families to make it worth to be able to break even, you think?
We believe we do, yes.
Okay. Okay. Do we need to, this needs a vote from us to continue?
Yes, I think we would just ask for a vote to allow us to offer a summer feeding program.
Madam Chair.
Madam Chair.
Ms. Briggs?
I move that we continue to offer the food program throughout this summer per the memo written.
Second.
Been moved and seconded. Any further discussion? All in favor for extending the summer food program?
Aye.
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 Thank you.
All right, it has passed. Thank you. Okay, so we're going to move down to the superintendent's report. Nancy, we already checked off the first. Do you want to move down to special education?
Yes, thank you. And you have two things in your packet. One is a memo that Dr. Marks wrote early on about the summer guidance. The summer guidance for running summer programs is very restrictive. And so the determination was made to continue special education services remotely, especially through the beginning phases of phase 3 in the summer. And then you have a second memo in your packets about a letter to parents that, and I'm happy to have Dr. Marks speak to it, that if we're able later in the summer, we understand the benefits to families or for the students of having some in-person gatherings, small groups, following all the guidelines and the safety precautions. So Dr. Marks, would you like to add anything to that?
Thank you, Nancy. Hello, everybody. Yes, so it has been an adventure following Department of Education's advice. Sitting here with 3 separate memos is about 40 to 50 pages, and then there are links to the CDC. So there's quite a bit of information, and especially focused on health and well-being. But the Department of Education has made it really clear that as we have learned that students with highest needs and ELL students, et cetera, have had the hardest time connecting in remote learning settings. And so we're making it a priority to focus on those students who we think have had the most challenges to try to engage them in the summer. But because of the health restrictions and the need to buy PPE and train staff and identify qualified trainers, we're still waiting for some of that from Department of Education. So it seemed wise to not make promises we couldn't deliver on. Already we're seeing opportunities, we believe, in the 3rd and the 4th weeks of summer. So the end of July and the 1st week in August, where we're planning some really specific small group, mostly for our students who are in substantially separate programs. And then some for our youngest students who have, in some cases, not students with disabilities I'm talking about, who have, in some cases, not accessed education at all, or in very limited ways. We're investigating opportunities even to go into the home, as well as provide some school-based through August. Should all things fall into place, should the numbers stay the same, the guidance comes through, and we're able to meet it.
So basically no vote is needed. We just wanted to inform the committee what our thinking and the planning that's been done and around special education for the summer.
Thank you.
And then the next is extended day. So similarly, and Jean Noonan, thank you for joining us as well. Similarly, extended day has, they've done a great job thinking through how we could possibly do this. And I'll let Jean just speak briefly because it became clear that running a summer program would probably not be possible.
Thank you, Nancy. Yeah, similar to what everyone else is dealing with, there's so much guidance that's coming out. I focused primarily on the Department of Early Education and CARES guidance that came out on June 1st. That gave us 33 pages of minimum requirements for health and safety. And, you know, health and safety is obviously top priority for the kids. And, you know, we tossed around many different ideas. How can we make this work? How can we make that work? And it became very clear pretty quickly, that we wouldn't be ready and able to operate a summer program while maintaining the health and safety of both the children and the staff. So we made that decision based on the guidance that came out. And again, it also referred back to the guidance that was coming from the CDC. And we decided instead to focus on what's fall going to look like and how can we best meet the needs of the kids for the fall.
And do we have an idea of what that will look like in the fall?
Extended day?
Yes.
Unfortunately, no, because it's going to be really driven by what the school day is going to look like.
Sure.
So we've been taking some of the examples that Nancy was just talking about and saying, so if this happens, then what can we do? So it really depends on what the school is going to look like and what the needs of the families are going to be. You know, we've spent a lot of time considering, if kids don't go back to school, do they go back to extended day? Or, you know, there's so much to consider. One of the biggest things for me, and that I've been discussing with some of my colleagues in the network of the extended day directors, is how do we rethink what our mission is? What is our purpose going to be? Because we're primarily social program, and our children are interacting with each other and with the staff and building those relationships. And the guidance that they're giving us is that they have to stay 6 feet apart and they can't share equipment and toys and games and art supplies and all that kind of stuff. So it's going to be a challenge, and it's changing constantly. You see, you know, every week we get different guidance. But I'm hearing such creative ideas from people. So I have no doubt that whatever it looks like in the end will be a good thing. I just think this summer it's not feasible. I think we're too soon.
Yeah, no, understandable.
Which is sad, because I think we were on path to have one of our best summers yet. We were really excited about it. It was planned.
Yeah. Well, there's always next year, hopefully.
Exactly.
Crossed, right?
Exactly.
And then the final thing in the superintendent's report, I think we've already talked about, that's the financial report. Terry, anything you need to add, or can we table it all till next meeting?
Well, we really didn't talk about the financial report. We talked about the transfers.
Okay. All right. So financial report.
Yeah, and I would just bring it to the bottom line, which is the last page of the financial report detail. And there were 3 recommended motions that I gave you. The bottom line is that if I had just printed you out a simple expenditure report, we have $2.2 million. Isn't that wonderful? Well, we don't. And then in a box at the bottom below that, I delineated all the different expenditures that we need to project coming out of that. And at the end of the day, right now I'm projecting we might have a fund balance of $55,000 to move to choice. Now, included in all of those different numbers that come out are the COVID-19 purchases, which right now look to be around $120,000, our prepay of $163,000 for next year, possible pre-purchase of supplies. I'll come back to that. There are 3 revolving accounts that right now are in deficit. We have to balance those before the end of the fiscal year. There is a positive note in that when we looked at the preschool revolving, there is part of a teacher that's never been charged to that account. So we'll transfer that part of a teacher into that account. That's a positive influence on expenses. And basically when that all sugars out, that's how you get to the 55,245.88. The refund that we voted on tonight will impact this as well. And that would conceivably impact some of the the numbers, and particularly one number that I would suggest for one of these motions. But there were three motions that I recommended at the end. The first motion, and that was to be the motion that I would recommend changing the amount on, is recommending that you allow me to approve the pre-purchasing of supplies and materials for the schools. The amount that I had recommended was $80,000. Right now, I would say I would have to recommend reducing that amount to $40,000, depending on, again, committee's wishes. The second motion that I had recommended was transferring up to an amount of $110,000 to cover wages and expenses in the three revolving accounts that I mentioned, and also to allow me to transfer a deficit that exists in the custodial revolving account to the facilities rental fund. The third motion that I recommended was to authorize me to transfer up to $150,000 of salaries and expenses from school choice back into Fund 10. And the reason that I wanted to have that flexibility is that's a number that I literally won't know until the last day. And there's just no way we're going to be able to come back for another meeting. So those were three motions that I had recommended as a result of this report. We can come back to these motions. We could come back to these motions on the 29th, where I would probably have firmer numbers. The only one that probably is of a timely nature is that it's probably a little hard for me to tell the schools what, if anything, they can pre-purchase at this point without some guidance from the committee now. As far as revolving funds and the other funds, we can come back to those. But if we're going to set aside any money for pre-purchasing supplies, the sooner I have that guidance, the sooner I can give that to the schools.
So maybe I missed, but I thought we were gonna hold off on these until the next meeting, or are you now saying that you need to have number two, that you would rather have the second motion?
The ones that we would hold off until the next meeting would be the line item transfers.
Okay.
Those are line item transfers.
Got it.
These are basically bottom line numbers.
Okay.
And as I say, we can still hold off on the revolving funds amounts because those might change. In fact, probably will be more precise if we wait. The only one that really is of a timely, the only one that really is a timely thing is that if we are going to allow the schools to pre-purchase anything, I'd need to have some guidance now from the committee. And let me just explain how that works procedurally. Is you give me a limit, but then I'm constantly checking these numbers.
Okay.
So it's not like you say, Terry, you got $40,000, go spend it. Okay. They have prioritized things that they would like to pre-purchase. And so we will start with, and we will do this on a fair basis, and we will start with their highest priorities, but we won't necessarily spend all that money at once because we'll keep tracking the expenditure lines.
Okay.
Madam Chair.
Mr. Catalano.
Actually, Mr. Wiggin, you said up to 40 is sufficient at this point?
Well, no, I think I'm sure if I asked everybody in the room, they would like the original number, if not more. I think the issue is that with the refund that we voted on earlier, I need to find that money somewhere in this mix of money. And that is why I'm reducing my recommendation at this point in time.
To what?
To 40. Up to 40.
Madam Chair.
Mr. Catalano.
I make a motion to authorize the business manager to spend up to $40,000 in pre-purchasing of supplies and materials for the FY21 or fiscal year 21. including any orders that may exceed $5,000.
Second.
It's been moved and seconded. Any further discussion?
I just have a question, actually, Madam Chair. So this is all non-COVID related material,
Yes.
right?
Yes.
Just a second.
And I think the easiest example which I think I gave you folks
Yeah, the
is
math.
everyday math. Yeah.
Okay, just making sure.
And Madam Chair, if I may, this is typical. This is, small amounts of money that weren't spent in certain line items. We then utilize at the end of the year to purchase general paper, the everyday math consumable workbooks, all of the things to have us be ready to start this school year.
Right, no, that makes sense. I was just thinking that it's hard now to think about the school year and not separate that need for something for everyone due to the new regulation. So I was just double checking that this was for those regular expenses that we would typically buy that wouldn't be on that CARES Act stuff.
Right. No, this is not going to be CARES Act related.
Okay, so I think we have a motion and a second. All in favor?
Aye.
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 All right, motion carries.
Thank you.
Do we want to move down to motion 2 and 3, or do you guys want to hold off on those? Hold off?
Madam Chair,
Mr. Conroy.
I would do item 3 just as it doesn't up to, and then we're not jammed on the 29th for any kind of expenses.
Then I would invite you to make a
Then
motion.
I move that the Millis School Committee authorizes the business manager to transfer up to $150,000 of salaries and expenses from the school choice revolving fund to Fund 10.
Second.
Been moved and seconded. Any further discussion? All in favor?
Aye.
Thank you.
Thank you. Motion carries. Okay, so we'll go down to the chairman's report. Since I am brand new at the chairman, I know this was something that Mark had put on. We wanted to talk about the reopening of the school playgrounds and the fields. That includes the high school track. I believe at the beginning of COVID, we had voted as a committee to close both the track and the playground to help with social distancing and keeping crowds down. Now that we're going into phase 2, I think it's a good time to just revisit that. And is that still appropriate, or can we? Is it time to open up at least the track and the athletic field to the public? I know the playgrounds is a little more difficult with sanitation requirements and the frequencies of that, so that might be a little more difficult. But Mark, I know this was your agenda item, so I don't know if you wanted to add anything to that.
No, I think we can just talk. It's really open as things were starting to open up a couple of weeks ago when phase 2 got opened, and technically outdoor recreation areas are included in that. I just thought it was something we should put on, and I think I had sent out, or it's online, I don't think it's in our packet, but I sent out the guidelines for both recreation, outdoor facilities, and even and playgrounds as well. Fields being somewhat separate than the playground areas, and really what the guidelines came down to in terms of playgrounds really puts the onus on the owners of the playground or the field to be responsible for making sure the sanitation procedures are in place and overseeing the groups of people that are there, et cetera. In terms of the outdoor recreation, phase 2 is really supposed to be groups of less than 10 in non-contact sports. If it's soccer or basketball, it should be individual skills actually run by a coach. It's not intended to be kind of free-for-all pickup games. So I just didn't know what we as a committee wanted to do in terms of the school property, because I do think, personally, I think it's incumbent upon the school to be in line with what state regulations and guidelines are, regardless of what people may be doing personally, in their own backyards, etc. I think there's two kind of, I just look at it a little bit differently from acting as a committee member that oversees the school in its ownership of these piece lands. So, yeah, so that was the discussion. So really it's.
And there had been questions about the tennis courts and the pickleball courts. So I asked John Engler who's been attending all the construction meetings, to do a memo that's in your packet as to why those aren't open yet. Basically, John, would you like to speak to that?
Sure, Nancy, thanks. Yeah, so we're still in the construction process over at the tennis court, pickleball courts. We're still having some painting done, some surfacing, and there was some touch-up surfacing on the basketball court just done yesterday. We still need to wait for the courts to completely
cured
for usage. So our concern at the moment is that we don't have fencing going around the pickleball and the tennis courts at the moment. Not to mention that we have some materials laying around the basketball court area. So we're hoping to keep the basketball courts and the playgrounds closed at least until the fence goes up. We can secure the tennis courts and the pickleball courts, locking them down so no one uses them, so we can continue finishing the project. After the project's completed, the SBC and TAP-A still need to sign off on anything, need to sign off on the projects so we don't jeopardize any warranty items.
So I think as far as the tennis courts or pickleball courts and the basketball courts and the playground, I think that we're just asking that before we open it, that we, as a group talk about it. So there are guidelines and we need to follow those state guidelines, and whether making sure that we have that sanitation, or do we even want to take on that responsibility with sanitizing, especially the playground, the public, or do we want to keep that closed just to the school and when school goes back into session? So I think we just ask that when we get to that point where it's all signed off, that we all kind of just come back and just chat about what's the best way to open up those areas.
Great.
What about I noticed in your memo, is the high school track open?
Yeah, as of June 5th, we went ahead and we opened up the pedestrian gate for people to go and run around the track or use the facilities as they need it.
Have we, is there a lot of people out there using it, or do we?
Yeah, I think we've seen an influx. At least some of the barrels are filling up quicker than usual. So I think it's getting word of mouth, and people are finding other alternatives to use that area.
Okay.
So who's responsible for monitoring it to ensure that groups of no less than 10 people are on it at any one time and not playing pickup football, which is what they were doing when we closed it? Because if we're not, my concern is if we are not monitoring these facilities and we can't be in compliance with the state guidelines as to how we're supposed to be overseeing it. And truth be told, this isn't my highest priority of what I think our staff should be doing, is having people watching this, then I'm not sure we should have them open if we can't be in compliance. But that's my thought. I'd love to have them open. Honestly, I think if people could walk the track, great. Unfortunately, from what I've seen anecdotally, not just on the field at the beginning of COVID, but at other open spaces in town, unfortunately, the kids are just not. They're doing whatever they want to do. So, my concern is that we're not able to manage, and I'm not sure we should be managing it by having our stuff open. But that's just my opinion.
Are tracks allowed? Are these open now?
Yeah, anything from an outdoor space can be open, but it's open with restrictions.
Or
like, Steve, you keep freezing.
Yeah, you keep freezing, Steve. I mean, I think the concern is if it was a park, it's one thing, but if it's school property and something, if we do observe a big group, and is there liability there? And, like Mark said, how do we police it? And do we even want to police it? Is it something we want to be spending our time on?
I'm sorry, I had to shut my VPN off. So the facilities are allowed to be open now, but there are some guidelines and procedures. Is that correct? So the track can be opened, but it needs to be monitored. There can't be games. It should just be people walking.
Yes. There can't be 10 or more groups. They can't be playing football. They have to be wearing masks. They have to be social distancing as much as they can, that type of thing.
Like you can have a group of 10 kids. So a coach, and not necessarily a high school coach, but a coach can run a skills practice for any sport with 10 or less kids, but the kids all have to be social distance, no contact. So there are things that can be being done, but they're not authorized to be open for pickup games.
Which is the concern if we open it, even, with the hope is people are going to respect that. And reality is, people want to go out and walk the track. But as we've seen driving around town, we're starting to see groups of kids gather, and they're not practicing.
If we put up like one of those sandwich boards with the rules and the guidelines, is that sufficient to meet our obligations, or do we have to do that and then literally monitor? Because the only way to do it is to have someone out there, and that's not a good use of time when we have limited resources at best. So are we really going to have a live person monitoring the fields? I don't know.
Yeah, and I don't know the answer to that. Maybe that's something we should look into. Is it enough if we post the rules?
The rules, right.
Or is that still open us to some risk?
I mean, the easiest way to deal with it, and I'm not sure it's the best way, but the easiest way would be just to lock the track, right? And if someone then jumps the fence, that's different, right? They're now trespassing. As much as I want our open air facilities to be available, we're in a different place in a different time. And I just don't think if we have an obligation beyond just the posting, I just don't think we have the resources available to have someone monitoring the track from 7 in the morning to 7 at night, or 7 in the morning to 8 at night. Dusk, I think it's dusk.
So what if we do this? What if we, while we're looking into whether we can post signage, unfortunately, do we lock the track until we can figure out if that's sufficient?
Yeah, unless we have somebody who's going to be on property who can be monitoring it to make sure that, over the course of the day, maybe we can have it open as long as there's somebody there that can be monitoring what's going on. So if there's somebody on property from, I don't know, 8 o'clock in the morning till 5 at night, 4 in the afternoon, whatever it is, and they can be keeping an eye on it, then it can be open. But if there's nobody there, after 4 or 5 o'clock, then we just have to lock the gates so that from 5 to dusk, we don't have to worry about it.
I think we should default to, while we're determining whether to sign, to keep it locked. And I would defer to John and his crew if they think they can monitor it without putting themselves in awkward positions and not doing something else to do that. I think it really should be what they can do that day, what their capacity is. That also that's an inconsistent message for the community that one day it's locked, the other day it's not. I think the safer way is to lock it until we get definitive answer from the state or figure it out. And maybe we could do that with the public health tomorrow. I mean, we could have an answer tomorrow.
Yeah, I agree. Nancy and John, unfortunately, can we lock that until we can figure that out? Thank you.
Yeah.
Okay.
Per Chairwoman Roach, the rain has begun.
I love you, Steve.
That's on record. That's recorded. That's forever.
Okay, so we're going to move to subcommittee reports. ESBC. Denise, do we have anything?
I don't have anything unless John and Nancy do. I don't even know when the next meeting is, actually, to be completely honest.
Actually,
the
yeah.
23rd is next meeting.
Okay. Thank you.
Okay. We have nothing under correspondence, unless there's anything else. We have executive session?
Yes.
Yes.
Couple of quick
anything
things.
else, we will adjourn to executive session, not return to open session. I guess we need a motion.
Madam Chair,
Mr. Catalano.
I make a motion to adjourn to executive session to discuss a furlough and a vacation buyout, not to return to open session.
It's been moved. We have a second.
Second.
I believe this is a roll call vote. Denise?
Aye.
Mark?
Aye.
Robin?
Aye.
Steve?
Aye.
And I'm an aye. So we are adjourned. Thank you,
Thank you, everyone, for coming.
Folks,
Thank
you.
you.